June 22, 1941. Nazi Germany invades the Soviet Union, its partner in the war against Poland, under the cover name Operation Barbarossa. Belarus, formerly known as the Byelorussian Socialist Republic, was one of the first areas to be captured by Germany. It had been ruled by Russia for nearly 150 years before the Nazi invasion. The Germans seized the capital, Minsk, within a week after the invasion and start their genocidal plans right away. Jews, who are confined to ghettos where they endure acute food shortages, excessive overcrowding, and famine, are among the first to be attacked. Hitler plans to eradicate the Slavs, the region's dominant ethnic group and someone the Germans consider to be racially inferior, in addition to the Jews. Mass killings, shootings, famine, and forced deportations are all consequences of Nazi policies on the local populace. The German 35th Infantry Division carried out one of the biggest atrocities in occupied Belarus, killing thousands of civilians in the process. Richard Johann George is its commander. On April 14, 1890, Johann George Richard was born in Liba, which was then a part of the German Empire. He joined the German army in the fall of 1909 and was promoted to lieutenant in March 1911 after completing military academy. Richard participated in the First World War, which started on July 28, 1914, and for his efforts that year, he received both grades of the Iron Cross. He was taken prisoner by the French in 1918 and held captive for 14 months. Richard resumed his military career in the German army after World War I ended on November 11, 1918, as an Oberleutnant, which was the equivalent of a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army. In January 1933, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party took control of the country. By the middle of 1938, Richard had advanced to the rank of Oberst, which was the same as colonel, and he was given command of the 11th Infantry Division's 23rd Infantry Regiment in February 1939. Nazi Germany used Blitzkrieg tactics, which combined speed, armored formations, and airstrikes, to invade Poland on September 1, 1939, sparking the start of the Second World War. Britain and France declared war on Germany in response to this invasion, starting the larger European struggle. Poland collapsed in a matter of weeks, and Germany shifted its focus west. The German army quickly invaded France in May 1940, evading its defenses by crossing Belgium. Within 6 weeks, Paris fell, and by June, the Nazis had taken over most of Western Europe. Richard participated in the Polish campaign and the Battle of France with the 23rd Infantry Regiment, earning him a decoration for his valiant efforts. Nazi Germany launched an invasion of the Soviet Union on Sunday, June 22, 1941, using the code name Operation Barbarossa. Finnish, Hungarian, Italian, Slovak, and Croatian forces provided support for 3 million German soldiers. This strike was not considered an ordinary military operation by Nazi Germany. The war against the Soviet Union was a racial conflict between German Aryans and inferior Slavs and Jews, as well as a war of annihilation between German fascism and Soviet communism. After the Soviet Union was invaded, the Nazi regime launched an unprecedentedly violent campaign. As the German military developed, civilians, especially Jews, communists, and other groups considered undesirable by Nazi ideology, were often targeted by Nazi forces, such as the SS and Einsatzgruppen, which were Nazi mobile killing squads. Millions of Soviet POWs endured forced labor, malnutrition, and summary execution, while entire towns were destroyed in mass executions. Richard began fighting in northern Russia with his regiment in June 1941, and in December of the same year, he received the German Cross in Gold, a decoration bestowed for valor and exceptional combat performance. Richard was elevated to Major General in April 1942 and given command of the 286th Security Division, which was actively fighting partisans in northern Belarus, especially in the Orsha area. Many war crimes against civilians were done by soldiers under his command. In many cases, Richard not only did nothing to stop these atrocities but actively encouraged them. The bloodshed escalated to terrible proportions during the 4-week anti-partisan Operation Forest Winter, which began in late December 1942. In all, 2,041 Belarusian citizens were deported for forced labor, 1,627 civilians were slain, and an estimated 8,000 animals and 167,460 meat rations were seized. Suppressing partisan groups was the main goal of the operation in order to protect the German army's rear areas and maintain the integrity of the supply and communication networks. In order to crush resistance and destroy supply systems, German forces systematically swept through rural and wooded areas. The Nazis used harsh tactics to exterminate partisans, which frequently resulted in numerous civilian deaths and the devastation of entire communities. For his exceptional cruelty, Richard in particular gained notoriety. Forcing local residents to plow, harrow, or walk over roads and trails was one of the most brutal methods used to clear minefields close to partisan camps. This approach killed 28 people, including 18 children, in one community in the Orsha region. Lieutenant General Hans Osman succeeded Richard as commander of the 286th Security Division in November 1943. He later became the commander of the 35th Infantry Division, a role he maintained until the end of the war. Richard showed a brutal commitment to control and discipline while serving as a divisional commander. In addition, he threatened to punish units and commanding commanders who lost battles severely and ordered the execution of all his soldiers in hospitals who had no wounds or illnesses. Richard was instrumental in the forced transportation of Soviet people to the Ozarichi concentration camp in March 1944. This camp was situated 140 kilometers southeast of Minsk, close to the city of Babarusk. Joseph Harp, the 9th German Army's supreme commander, gave the order to set up the camp. There was only a huge, barbed wire enclosed space with no dwellings or sanitary facilities. At least 40,000 civilians were driven into the camp by soldiers from the 35th Infantry Division, under the command of Richard, with reinforcements from Sonderkommando 7B of Einsatzgruppe B. At least 500 victims who were too frail to walk any further had already been shot at by the guards en route. The 9th Army recommended that burial commandos, who would dispose of the dead bodies, follow the moving columns during future operations of this nature. Anybody who approached the fencing in the camps looking for water was instantly shot by the guards. The majority of the inmates were relatives of slave laborers, including small children under 13, the elderly, mothers with young children, and the sick. They were left to fend for themselves in the open marshes without food, clean water, shelter, or medical assistance after several of them contracted typhus. At least 9,000 more people have perished in a single week. Despite the extreme cold, people were not allowed to light fires in order to prevent the Red Army from learning about the operation before the retreat had occurred. There was a gate with barbed wire, small watchtowers with soldiers and German shepherds, but nothing else, said Larissa Stashkevich, who survived the camp and shared her memories after the war. She clarified that anyone attempting to start a campfire was shot right away. She huddled behind the bodies of slain inmates to stay warm. The thousands of killings were hailed as a victory by the German High Command, who called the victims useless mouths. Dieter Pohl, a German historian, has called the camp's construction one of the worst crimes the Wehrmacht ever committed against civilians. When the Russians initiated Operation Bagration in the summer of 1944, the Red Army utterly destroyed the German front line and annihilated 28 of Army Group Center's 34 divisions. Despite suffering significant losses during the Soviet attack, Richard's 35th Infantry Division was able to make a largely effective withdrawal to East Prussia. Later, the division participated in the East Prussian offensive spearheaded by the Soviet Union, and in the last stages of the conflict, it was surrounded close to Polish Gdansk. Richard and his division turned themselves into the Soviet Union on May 8, 1945, the day the Second World War in Europe came to an end. Johann George Reich was tried for his involvement in the crimes in Belarus shortly after his capture. He was one of 18 defendants in the Minsk trial, a war crimes trial held in Minsk, the capital of Soviet Belarus, by a Soviet military court. Richard was questioned on December 15, 1945, from 9 p.m. until 2 a.m., as part of the trial that started in December 1945. Richard consistently asserted that he had only been carrying out orders from his superiors, despite the fact that he cooperated with investigators and acknowledged his wrongdoing. Horrible and mind-shattering facts were demonstrated in the court, he added in closing. I am now prepared to contribute to the fight against fascism as a resolute opponent of the Nazi government. Later, he appealed for mercy. Johann Richard, the principal defendant at the Minsk trial, was nevertheless found guilty on all counts and given the death by hanging sentence on January 29, 1946, along with 13 other men. Everybody in the courtroom applauded and the judge announced the death sentences. The next day, their execution was made public and turned into a horror show. Over 100,000 spectators from the general public attended the execution of the 14 Nazi criminals, which took place in today's Victory Square, Minsk, a horse racing arena. As thousands of men, women, and children watched, Soviet officials knotted the nooses on the 14 men as they were taken to the gallows on 14 trucks. One prisoner was on the platform of each of the 14 trucks. Some of the Nazi criminals who were going to be hanged stood with pride, while the others soaked their pants. The condemned Nazis were left hanging and swaying in the air as the vehicles passed. Richard was 55 years old on January 30, 1946, the day of his execution. For Johann George Richard, no tears were shed. We appreciate you viewing, and to ensure you don't miss our upcoming episodes, please click the bell notification symbol, like, and subscribe. We hope to see you on the channel again soon.